Regina Neville. A few notes for everyone. This meeting is being live streamed on the District 287 YouTube channel. The meeting is also being recorded. The link for the recording will be on the District 287 website in the school board section. The public is invited to share their thoughts and comments with the board. If you'd like to do so, please complete the virtual meeting request form for written input that is available in the 287 website school board section. Written comments received by 4:30 on the day of the board meeting will be read at the beginning of the meeting. And if anyone would like to ask a question or share a comment, I ask that they please select the raise hand feature in the blue bar menu near the top of the board book premiere screen. Since this is, we do have people joining us virtually, all votes will be taken by roll call led by our clerk, Crystal Bruckey. At this time, I'd like to invite board member Heather Douglas to please read the mission for Intermediate District 287. Welcome, Heather. And you need to unmute.
All right, is it off now?
You are ready to go.
Okay, thank you so much. The mission of Intermediate District 287 is to be the premier provider of innovative specialized services to ensure that each member district can meet the unique learning needs of its students.
Thank you. At this time, we'll have board member introductions. I'd like to ask Crystal Bruckey to please identify each board member, at which time we will introduce ourselves and the district we represent.
Adams.
Steve Adams here from Hopkins, District 270.
And I'm Crystal Brackey from Richfield Public Schools. Casey.
Ann Casey, St. Louis Park Public Schools.
Keane.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Keane, Wayzata Public Schools.
Dallas. Ruthie, can you hear us?
Sorry, I'm looking right at you and talking away. Hi, everyone. This is Ruthie Dallas. I'm from Brooklyn Center Community Schools.
Douglas.
Hi, I'm Heather Douglas, and I represent Osseo Area Schools, District 279.
Coons.
Hi, Michelle Coons, representing the Orono District.
Marty.
Hi, I'm Heidi Marty, and I represent the Westaka Public Schools.
Neville.
Good evening, I'm Regina Neville. I represent Edina Public Schools.
Sant.
Sam Sant, representing Robbinsville 281.
And Seidel.
Seidel, representing Eden Prairie 272.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. And at this time, I will introduce the staff members who are joining us virtually and in person. We have Ann Becker, Annie Mitty, Ben McGrath, Chad Maxa, Elizabeth Lodge Rogers, Jacob Horish, Jonathan Voss, Julie Turilla, Kim Helgeson, May Hawkins, Melissa Bratting, Rachel Hicks, Radius Guest, Tanya Allen, Juanine Mgini, and Superintendent Sandy Lewandowski. Are there any staff members I've accidentally missed? Welcome, everyone. I'm going to walk through this evening's agenda. There are a couple of items that are added, so I'm going to point those out. We'll have approval of the consent agenda this evening, and then a new item added, 5.1, share the success. We have some good news to celebrate with an Education Support Professional of the Year announcement. That will be followed by the Superintendents Report with an update on the District 287 Learning Plan, a financial perspective on COVID-19 and beyond, a key performance indicators update, an action item with what the board needs to know about emergency and crisis plans for 2020-21, information about what the board needs to know about classification and compensation study. There is no instructional report or business services and labor relations report this evening. There is a new item under board business in the board chair report, item 9.2.1.1. We will be discussing a board resolution regarding meetings by telephone or other electronic means. And we'll close the evening with an AMSD report and once around the table, just general updates. Are there any additions to the agenda? Hearing none, I move to accept the agenda. Is there a second?
Second, Ruthie Dallas.
Seconded by Ruthie Dallas. Thank you. And I invite board members to unmute their mics in preparation for the roll call vote. Crystal.
Adams.
Aye.
Brackey is an aye. Casey.
Aye.
Keane.
Yes.
Dallas.
Yes.
Douglas.
Yes, I just actually have a question. I can't see that. My computer shows that my video's on, but I can't see my own video. Can you guys see me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
Coons.
Aye.
Marty.
Aye.
Neville.
Yes.
Sant.
Yes.
Seidel.
Yes.
Motion carries. At this time, we'll have audience opportunity to speak. Juanine, has anyone requested to address the board this evening?
No.
Thank you so much. We'll move on to approval of the consent agenda. Are there any items anyone would like removed from the consent agenda for separate consideration? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved. Adams.
Moved by Steve Adams,
Second, Keane.
seconded by Andrea Keane. Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Adams.
Aye.
Brackey is an aye. Casey.
Aye.
Keane.
Yes.
Dallas.
Yes.
Douglas.
Aye.
Coons.
Aye.
Marty.
Aye.
Neville.
Aye.
Sant.
Yes.
Seidel.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you. Next up, it's exciting to have good news. So I'm happy to welcome Superintendent Sandy Lewandowski to address our Education Support Professional of the Year.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair and board members. It is my pleasure to share that Sue Stratman, one of our local 2209 staff, was named as one of 5 finalists for the Ed Minnesota Educational Support Professional of the Year. Many of you probably know Sue. She has been part of our district for a long time. She's also part of the 2209 leadership group as the chief negotiator. She serves in our Assistive Technology and Information Network program right here at the District Service Center, and she's on our District Service Center Racial Equity team. She was nominated by Cindy Brosey, an educational assistant at Ann Bremer Education Center in Brooklyn Park. And Ms. Brosey explained that Sue is a fierce advocate for the students she works with, and sometimes for probably, and is always looking out for what's best for them. She is a leader, an advocate, an involved community member, and a great example of what an extraordinary educational assistant is. I'm excited she was chosen as an Ed Minnesota finalist, and we look forward to the results in the coming days. They will be announced on November 9th as part of a statewide teachers union virtual celebration this year. So let's everyone be sure to congratulate Sue on that accomplishment.
Thank you, Sandy. And Sue, on behalf of the board, congratulations. This is certainly an honor and not a surprise. So really nice to celebrate. Next up on the agenda is item 6, our superintendent's report. We'll begin with an update on the District 287 learning plan. Sandy.
Thank you. Board members, in just a moment, Ben McGrath will be showing a presentation that will outline the recommendation that we are bringing tonight. But before he begins that, I just want to acknowledge what a really difficult time this has been for anybody working in the educational field. And yet, I think it's also important to recognize there are so many heroes out there who are working on behalf of our students and families. There's really heroes everywhere to acknowledge. I just wanted to mention a few that I've heard, but they are representative of many more. I know that Brian Burns, one of our APs at Ann Bremmer, has been mentioned to me so many times about his support to teachers and educational assistants as he has served in the role of assistant principal at Ann Bremmer, and he is greatly admired for his support. And there are APs everywhere in the district doing very similar work. We have leaders like Kurt Vandenbloom, our leader of our facilities staff, and he and the facilities staff have kept our buildings just as clean as they need to be. They are working long hours and in very unusual conditions to do that, and we need them. They're an essential part of our school district. Same thing with Sarah Streifels and the food service workers. They have worked on so many different ways to prepare food, box food, transport food. They have done everything they've been asked and gone beyond. Same thing with our clerical staff, people like Katie Hahn, our care and treatment program, who is endlessly supporting the kinds of details that are needed to keep that kind of program running smoothly. And teachers like Melissa Brandenburg, who treats this pandemic as a competition to ensure that her kids get the best possible instruction she can deliver. And EAs like Tish Jennings Holmes at North Education Center, who is admired by her colleagues for the support she has given. And then finally, leaders that are on this call who have been working days, nights, and weekends to keep everything moving. Things like this are a terrible challenge for everyone in our communities. And I'm just grateful to work with the team that we have here in District 287. So with that, I'm going to ask Ben McGrath to just update the board on where we're at right now with the learning plan. So Ben.
Thank you, Superintendent Lewandowski, Madam Chair Neville, members of the board. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you tonight and share our learning plan update. I'll go ahead and share my screen. So just in keeping with good instructional practice, really the goal for the next 10 or 15 minutes here at the end of the presentation, that you'll have an understanding of the updates that we've made to our proposed new plan for serving our students in District 287. The agenda and the topics that I'll cover here include the following. First, a little bit of a background about the guidance that we received kind of all the way back to the spring of 2020 to where we are most recently in the month of November from various state government offices, including MDE, MDH, and the governor's office. I'll just remind us about the District 287 model that we've implemented dating back to last spring and where we are now. We'll talk a little bit about COVID cases in our district, our emphasis on racial equity, the process for decision making, and then we'll close with the updated proposed model, a few next steps, and then of course we'll take questions and answers. Just in terms of background and creating a backdrop to kind of what brings us to today on November 12th. If you'll recall and date back to the middle of March of 2020, that schools across the state, of course, closed down. And over the next several months, we worked really hard to develop our version of connected learning. And I'll talk a little bit later about how that varies from distance learning. But those months since we closed, we worked hard to develop our model of connected learning. And really, it wasn't until we came into the middle of the summer on July 31st at a press conference the governor held, where we learned about the learning model parameters, the graphic that you see there that provides guidance to districts across the state on their recommendations for the learning model based on the cases per 10,000. And this chart that I think that we're all familiar with right now really lays out the direction that MDE and MDH has primarily guided for how we should serve our students. And for much of the work over the late summer and into the early fall, that the direction was really centered on these case rates and this model and parameters of how we should think about our learning model. But on that July 31st press conference and that executive order on July 30th, that we learned about kind of initial direction around how we should also be providing in-person and prioritizing in-person learning for historically marginalized students. And that direction for us to provide in-person learning began to slowly evolve and include other groups of students in special education, and even as broadly as students that are behind academically. Further, that we are encouraged to think about targeted closings, perhaps in programs or buildings, rather than the learning model parameters that we first thought about how we would open and close our district and provide a learning model for our students. And one of the reasons that we thought it was important for us to share this information here tonight was just to paint a little bit of a picture about how things have evolved over the last several months. For some, it can be confusing when we see the graphic and the table that you have in front of you here tonight. And we wondered about how we got to case rates that are past that and still trying to prioritize in-person learning. And so we've really tried to wrestle, along with every other district probably across our state, with how to do both, how to follow the parameters, as well as follow the guidance that says we should prioritize in-person learning for our students, and especially the students that we serve in our district here in 287. And that dynamics really played out, and it's been a challenge over the last several weeks to try to wrestle with both of those, not separate, but at times competing sets of guidance. The model that you see here in front of us is probably familiar to everybody. And this is the way that we organized our steps to return to in-person schooling. On the left-hand side, the step 0, that's the connected learning with those green plus signs referring to the connected part that differentiates from the distance part, or distance learning to connected learning. And steps 1, 2, and 3 were the steps that we worked through the first part of this school year. So where we are currently, of course, in step 3, and we've been serving students in step 3 over the last several weeks, approximately a month. I want to talk a little bit about cases and COVID cases in our district and some implications for staffing. First, we've learned a lot about how to prevent COVID in our district. The mitigation factors that we have in place, thanks to some of our excellent leaders like Jacob Horsch and Chad Maxa, who have really led the way for how can we prevent COVID cases in our district and how can we respond to COVID cases when they do happen. The kinds of practices that we've developed now for when we have a COVID case and how we handle that to identify close contacts, issue communication out to those close contacts and to the school community more broadly is miles ahead of where it was just a month ago. Again, thanks to folks like Chad and Jacob, but also Rachel Hicks, who does such an amazing job with communications. And although there's been it's been really a limited virus spread within our district from staff to staff or staff to students or students to staff. That there's been some of that, but for the most part, we've really seen pretty limited virus spread across our district. And we're thankful for our ability to recently provide additional testing for all of our staff and families over the course of this year. In regards to COVID cases, just to give you a little bit of more information about the kinds of the numbers of cases that we've seen in our district. So as of today, November 12th, that we've had 16 confirmed cases. 9 of those have come within the last 14 days. And we've had 82 report symptoms, but 36 within the last 14 days. Someone in the household with symptoms is 44, with 20 in the last 14 days. And exposed to someone with COVID, 75 and 35 within the last 14 days. What that means is for where we are currently today, that we have approximately 100 staff that are out in quarantine. Now, of course, that varies depending on the day, because sometimes staff will come back from quarantine and others will go to quarantine. But we're at that kind of approximation of about 100 staff in quarantine. In addition, that we currently have about 130 staff members who've been granted work from home accommodations due to pre-existing conditions. So that 130 staff members does not include those numbers that I listed on the previous slide, or any staff members who are out due to any other illness that they have. I'm going to move us into what I think everybody is really well aware of, and that's our focus and priority around our racial equity work. First, we've really emphasized our racial equity approach, and we've strived to hold ourselves accountable in all of our incident command meetings, our leadership meetings, and at any point in the process to make sure that we have race equity front and center in our decision making, and that when we think about a change to our learning model or any other, again, decision that we make, that it's part of our practice. And if we're going to make a decision about students or families or staff, that we make sure that racial equity is talked about and part of our decision making. Excellent leaders in our district, like Radius Guess, have helped us put together this decision-making protocol, which is now evident on our leadership agendas. And so that when we have an agenda item where we're making a decision, you'll see these questions right next to that agenda item. And we ask ourselves, who's participating in this analysis? First of all, who's at the table? And what are the racial equity impacts of the decision? Who's going to benefit or be burdened by this decision? And finally, are there strategies to mitigate any unintended consequences of the decision? We ask ourselves these questions at any point where we're going to make a decision about what we're going to do next, or something, again, that affects our students, staff, families, or our broader community. We've also developed some racial equity non-negotiables. One, that our students of color will have the opportunity, the same access and opportunity for the same high quality education as our white students. It's not negotiable for us to enter into any other process that gets us to something other than that. And two, that our staff of color will not be disproportionately affected by our decision making. Both of those are non-negotiables for our decision making. I'll move us now to our revised learning model, or proposed revised learning model. And first, just want to draw your attention back to our metrics resource. It's the screenshot on the right-hand side of the screen is the link that you see on the left-hand side. But it's the 5 ways that we use data to and other factors to inform our decisions. One is that data analysis that you can see at the top on the right-hand side. 2 is our member district alignment. 3 is expert guidance from local, state, and federal health agencies. The ones that you see there and the regional team that Sandy and others will meet with tomorrow and bring this proposed plan to. Recommendations from the stakeholders, including our back to school planning team, local 2209 leadership, our incident command team, our principals, and surveys from our staff, family, and students. And lastly, just our readiness. And we call this out just to bring to everyone's attention that we've really been thoughtful about how we get to decision making, whether we're moving up a step or we're moving back. But really our rationale for bringing a proposed change to our model comes down to this, and this is what's, I think, front and center for everybody each day when we wake up and we turn on our computer or look at our phone or turn on our TV, that it's no surprise, including today where we set another record for COVID-19 cases in our state. The case rates are rising dramatically in our community. The left-hand side of the screen here is the official county data that we use to make our decisions. And you can see that that's ending on November 2nd. So it's about 10 days old, or is 10 days old. And that Hennepin County total that is perhaps a little hard to see, but you can see there is at 57.6. Again, ending on November 2nd. On the right-hand side is you see a graphic that perhaps you've seen before or not, but it's from a researcher at the University of Minnesota. This is a screenshot from 2 days ago on November 10th. And you can see on November 10th that we were at 78.1. Again, these are cases per 10,000. And looking down on the lower graphic, these purple diamonds are the projected 1 week forecast. And so you can see that when we project out about a week from now or a little less than that, that the projection is that we will be over 100 cases per 10,000 by the time we get to the middle of next week. So then our proposed revised model is what you see here, that we would move to connected learning from December 2nd through at least January 15th. That November 30th and December 1st will be district professional development days that we would use to allow us to prepare for the transition and ensure our teachers have the opportunity to organize their classrooms so that they can best serve our students. We would really reevaluate and communicate to stakeholders any update to this change in our learning model no later than January 15th. That's 2 weeks prior to the first date that would be in session. The 15th of January is a Friday, and the 19th is a Tuesday, the day after Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. Unlike previously this spring, this does include our care and treatment programs. The bullets that you see here in front of you, these are the features of connected learning in the way that we defined it earlier this year. So when we first moved to connected learning as opposed to distance learning, these are some of the features that we said it's different than distance learning, it's connected learning. And it's things like an option for our students to receive in-person mental health support from 287 partners. It's things like one-on-one support from a mentor or a tutor. It's extra support and guidance for our families about how they can help their student and support them at home. And it's that enhanced curriculum that leaders like John Voss have really led to make sure have a social justice focus. But this time we knew that we wanted to do even better, that we had a vision for the way that we wanted connected learning to look in the spring. And we said we have more work to do to realize and reach that vision that we have. So now when we're talking about connected learning during the time period that I just shared, that all of our students will have the option of up to 1 day of in-person learning per week, that we would begin immediately the process to work with students and families to identify when that 1 day would be and to coordinate schedules. That would further develop in-person mental health supports from not just our partners, but also from our 287 mental health staff. And we've done a lot of work around engagement and measuring, tracking, and responding to student engagement over the last several months. And we want to make sure that we have programs like Check and Connect in place, and so that we can support the engagement of our students every step of the way and offering them mentoring programs and keeping them dialed into 287 as their education provider. It's my last slide, and then I'll open it up and ask Sandy what I missed and open it up for questions. In terms of just next steps, right? Some pretty obvious things here to start. One is that we need to communicate with our staff and our families. Two, we need to work with our building leaders who've done such an amazing job throughout this process and really hung in there, as Sandy said, in a challenging times, and looked for opportunities for how we can do this even better for our kids. We're going to work with them to organize and prepare those professional development days. We need to coordinate schedules for our staff to be on site and support those students, especially during that time they're going to be there for that 1 day per week. And develop reporting expectations and guidelines for all of our instructional staff, including district leaders, building leaders, our 2209 staff, and everybody else in particular who are student facing. So with that, I am going to jump out of the presentation. And I am going to stop presenting and ask Sandy, maybe if perhaps first, is there anything you'd like to add that I didn't cover there, and then we'll maybe go to questions.
Well, thank you, Ben. I really appreciate that really thorough presentation. I think just a couple things I would mention is I just want to acknowledge that it has been a very, very much a changing situation, and keeping everyone fully informed is one that we've been committed to. But with the amount of information that is being produced, it sometimes can be hard to keep those lines of communication very thorough and understandable to everyone that they're going to. I think the main thing about communication, though, that has been somewhat troubling is that this moved from a very defined grid that we received in late August to changes from that set of metrics to going to the county, and also looking at any closings from what was referred to as a scalpel approach. So a more of a room being sent home, or a wing perhaps being closed, as opposed to a whole school and a whole district. And so that was a learning curve as that switch came from the state level. But even with that, I think we've tried to adapt and follow those rules. And our county meeting, the second consultation that we've had, is tomorrow with the regional team, and includes Hennepin County Public Health and their epidemiologists. I think it's important to know in the first consultation, they and the district agreed that we would go for 2 more weeks and then we would reevaluate. But it goes without saying, this past week has really taken a toll from a COVID transmission standpoint. And it is because of that that we'll be going in with the recommendation tomorrow to see what Hennepin County and the regional team says about the information that Ben just presented. And obviously we will follow a direction of public health on this matter. So that's where we're at right now. Communications have gone out to staff and parents, alerting them to this discussion tonight. And with that, I'll just stop and see if the board has any comments or questions for us.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you, Ben. And thanks to your team, because I know that this has been a model that has been considered and updated consistently as we've been moving forward through these last few months. Are there any questions or comments? Sam, go ahead, please.
I have a question. What has been the staff concerns? Or I know we saw some updates with emails that they're being discussed with the union leadership, and what's their take on that right now currently?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
What's the take on the position of the staff regarding this? And I know there was an email sent out earlier in October regarding discussions with union leadership. What's the take on this so far?
Yeah, well, the union leadership has been on our district-wide planning team. So they have certainly participated in the planning sessions. I think it's also fair to say that our staff, as the pandemic has really taken a toll, especially in the last couple weeks, are fearful. And I think that's a genuine fear and one we're seeing across our communities. I think what is challenging is trying to balance the needs of both our member districts, our kids and families, and our staff. And that's what we've attempted to do through this. But that being said, this has been a very difficult time for everyone, and that includes our staff.
Next, we'll hear from Heather Douglas, who will be followed by Crystal Brackey. So Heather, go ahead, please.
Thank you. So first, I just wanted to say, Ben McGrath, thank you so much for the very thorough and detailed information. I really appreciate it. It's a really good overview of what's going on in our district at a kind of a high level. And I have a couple of questions. One of my questions is in regards to communication. Being that this is a public board meeting, obviously anybody in our district can view this information. And I was just curious if you had any particular guidance or input on how we should talk to our home districts about this and kind of get them apprised of the situation here at 287. And I'll let you answer that before I go into my next question.
I can take that one, Heather, maybe, if it's all right. So we have been in communication with all of our member districts. I sent out a memo explaining what was our plan earlier this week, which was not as conservative as this plan, but a plan that we explained to our superintendents, business directors, special ed directors, and transportation directors. So all of those individuals in each member district got the same memo, and we asked for feedback. We also made calls. Melissa made calls to all the special ed directors, trying to check in with them. And then I sent out another memo this morning saying, we've got to go even more further. And so I have had some feedback from two special ed directors to Melissa in a number of those situations. And I suspect we're still needing some to call us back and recognizing that their schedules are very busy as well. But we have been in communication with our member districts, and especially, I'd say, of those groups, probably special ed directors and transportation directors, because they kind of go hand in hand. But we're trying to respond to both their input and their feedback. I would say probably the biggest concern that we share is trying to make sure that our special education students that do need some additional face-to-face instruction, mental health support, that we figure out how to do that in a way that is compliant with their individual educational plans. But we're working on how to do that in concert with our member districts.
Thank you. My next question is, well, first I'll give you just a little background and then I'll ask my question. I feel personally very strongly, as I'm sure most of us do, that our kids in 287 are the most at risk for the detrimental effects of not being in school. And so I have a lot of concerns about having them go into full connected learning. I do really appreciate the, the additional supports that have been added as we've gone on, but can we just take a minute to talk about these kids and what it's going to be like for them to not be in school?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
This is the delicate balance, right, between those three groups. How do we manage this? And I think the plan earlier this week was not as conservative. And we intended to try to simply take the 2 PD days as well as the 2 weeks after the holiday break to try to break up that potential for holiday spread. But I think it very much became clear almost the minute I sent that email, things started to really ripple through buildings. And you may have seen the email today that we did need to close Ann Bremer Education Center. And I think the distinction I would draw is that we have a large number of setting 4 students, which operates as a big school community with kids who do need to have more contact with more adults in order to get their IP needs met. And so our spread factor probably is higher because of that. And we reached the point, as you saw in Ben's presentation, that our ability to keep enough staff in program to run at safety just became depleted this week. We just did not feel, as these rates keep climbing, that we would be able to do it. And I think the Ann Bremer situation kind of was the example of that. I do share your concern. I
know you do, especially you.
And we will make it, I guess, a commitment to try to really not only continue the connected learning, but ramp it up for where it may be needed in concert with parents and families, of course.
Sure.
And try to make those very unique arrangements that will need to be crafted in order for that to happen. We also will keep watching those rates and seeing, hopefully when they start going the other direction sooner rather than later, that we're able to get back and move the other direction again. We do have to watch out for our vulnerable students, and it's our responsibility, and we're going to try to do that. At a very minimum, we want to stay in contact with those kids and families. And so we're going to be making a lot of calls, a lot of contacts to make sure we know where those children are and how they're doing from a mental health standpoint, particularly. But we simply cannot continue to keep every operation running at this point.
Yes, I understand that it's a huge conflict of, having staff available and also trying to serve the needs of these kids in a safe way. I'm just wondering if we have anything kind of in the pipeline or in the works that we're thinking about if we can't get back to school in mid-January, or to increase the effectiveness of connected learning for some of those kids.
We've already been in discussion about that, and actually are going into meetings about it again tomorrow with our incident command team and principal group. And so that work is just beginning to get underway right now, but it will include a review of everybody and to see what they need. And if they need something different during this time that we're operationally able to provide, then that's what we should be doing. And we should work with the parent and the member district to get that properly documented and delivered. And we'll do that to the extent that we can safely do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question or comment is from Crystal Brackey. Crystal, go ahead, please.
Yeah, and apologies if I missed a little bit more detail that was shared in the presentation, or the answer might be that we don't have details yet, but I was really interested to hear more about the bullet point of students being able to come in 1 day a week and what that means, especially on the staff side of things, knowing that, again, like our staff capacity, our staff comfort, our staff ability to be present because of the impacts of the virus in their own lives, are all things that I started to think about as I saw that bullet point. So just wanted to see if there was more that could be shared about that.
Yeah, thank you, Crystal. That absolutely is a spot on question, because everything we do has a ripple effect of probably 100 different details behind it. And I'm going to let Ben respond first, and then I'll add to it. So Ben, do you want to respond to what we've been talking about thus far?
Yeah, definitely. I think your question is really spot on. And again, it really gets to the core of this challenge that we feel like we're in right now, and trying to do both things. That we know that in-person learning is our best chance to make a difference with the kids that we serve in District 287. Yet we're also, of course, in this really dramatically rising COVID rate scenario. And we're really trying to find a balance between how can we do both things that are really important, serve our kids the very best that we can, and ensure their safety and the safety of our staff. We don't have all of the schedules played out yet in terms of how we're going to make this work for our staff, not just our teaching staff, our educational assistants and our teachers, but also our support staff, our social workers and psychologists and assistant principals and district leaders. But what we're committed to doing, kind of right now and into tomorrow, is working with those. And you'll see in just a little bit when we share some data that we have about 60% of our students who are still opting for some version of hybrid. That 40% of our students so far, approximately, have opted for connected learning. That leaves us with 60% that we're going to work with to try to offer that one day of in-person learning if they want it. There may be more students and families who say, given the case rates, given where this is going, I think we're better off just staying in connected learning. We're going to find that out just as soon as we can get our communication out to our families. But again, I think it's about trying to find the right balance that's going to do both things, keep everybody safe and prioritize in-person learning to some degree for our students. And we're going to get to work on those schedules and working with our leaders to make that happen with our teachers and teaching teams just as soon as we can.
Yeah, and I would just follow up that, yes, in fact, that principal incident command group I mentioned just a few minutes ago are already starting to sharpen their pencils and think about how do we do what's right for kids, what's proper from a legal IEP standpoint, and we can work with member districts, particularly in this case, transportation. I think all board members know how challenging transportation can be. And so just one of the things that is critical in each of these steps, we've had to at least have a 2-week notification. And even that is tight for many transportation departments to make changes and reliably get kids where they need to be 2 weeks later. So all that is beginning already to take place in conjunction with those transportation departments and member districts.
Our next question or comment is from Andrea Keane.
Sandy and Ben and the whole incident command team, I just wanted to thank you for your work. I think in addition to kind of the tension that Heather talked about between knowing in-person learning is the best for our kids and keeping our staff safe, I think, the added complexity of having to try to meet the expectations of all the different member districts, I just can't even imagine how difficult that is. So I just want to extend my thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And maybe it's good to note, we've got the whole gamut of member districts, from those that have really not been in a hybrid format yet. They've been primarily distance learning since school opened, all the way to districts that obviously were already starting to serve elementary kids even in more extensive 5-day-a-week kind of matter. And all those districts are kind of that have been serving kids have been shifting now over the period of last week or so. So it is a gamut of member districts, but that is part of being an intermediate. So we do have some experience with that. But your point is, I think, a good one for this situation. There's so many competing needs that is part of every discussion we have, and trying to balance those needs and come up with the right plan for that moment. And yet at the same time, be ready to adapt and change as we go forward with the kind of factors that are changing in our communities and our state. It isn't, I mean, I do want to acknowledge to everybody, parents, families, member districts, and staff, this is not a perfect process, but we are trying to both know the right thing to do and adapt as we go with additional knowledge. And we commit that we're going to continue to do that as we go forward.
Thanks. Our next question or comment is from Michelle Coons. Michelle, go ahead, please.
Okay, sorry. So I also just wanted to express my gratitude every time I read the documents that we have in preparation for the meeting, my first thing is, oh my gosh, how are they going to do this one? And you guys come up with solutions that are just top of the line. I did want to just mention that Orono is going to distance learning. I just saw sort of a flash in my inbox. That's my district also struggling with my other district providing the solutions. So thank you all very, very much on behalf of all the students. You guys are the best. So thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Any additional questions or comments about the learning plan?
I just have one more question.
Sure.
How is our homeless and highly mobile students, how are they being impacted and tracked and helped through this?
Well, I think and I would invite Elizabeth, if you would like to add to this, please do. I think it is one of the biggest regrets that we have about this pandemic is it's one of those things that homeless and highly mobile kids are probably some of the most impacted. And we are trying to stay in touch with them. We're trying to keep those mental health connections. We see that population of kids as being very much in need of those connections. I think we should assume that they're struggling right now.
And I would agree. I know that our staff, our social workers, and our teams are working hard every day, tracking kids down and following up. But this is a challenge for us that we continue to just wrestle with, and doing what we can, doing a lot of following up and finding locations even for where there might be opportunities to at least access a place with Wi-Fi, for example, providing the students with connectivity in addition to the Chromebooks has been a big one, so we can connect. But this one, I mean, there are a number of things that I know keep us up at night collectively. And
do you have any other resources, maybe not necessarily like related to technology, but other resources that we can or are already offering to try and support these kids through this?
We have our social workers and our homeless and highly mobile student liaison have a lot of good connections, not only within not-for-profit organizations and other organizations, but within the resident districts as well, and Minneapolis, where we're able to kind of network to get services in place, from food, shelter, all those pieces, and have been able to reach out with additional supplies and et cetera. So we do have a crew of folks that are pretty relentless in locating the kids when we lose track of them, because that happens due to their mobility, but also connecting them back up and connecting them back up and connecting them back up with us, and then with different places that for resources, as well as for families. I'm referencing it because I think of our older group of students that are really on their own. We have a number of students that are, but we also, of course, have families and increasing numbers of families.
Right. That's unfortunately something we've seen is increasing numbers in our homeless population. And I'm just really concerned about not having somewhere for these kids to go, you know, especially in the winter months. Some of, you know, some of their safety net is just being at school every day. And now we're in a unique situation where we can't offer that. And I just, you know, would encourage, you know, to keep up the good work of trying to connect with them and get them resources. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Heather.
Any additional questions or comments?
I would just maybe clarify in closing that I'm sure recall that earlier in our school year, the board gave direction and approval for myself in consultation with the board chair to make those decisions, but this certainly was an important time to update you on that. And like I said, we'll take it to the regional team tomorrow. Depending on what happens at that regional team meeting, we will send out a notice to families and staff and member districts by the end of the day tomorrow.
Okay, thank you all for continuing to adapt and keep everyone's well-being in mind, balancing all of the needs, which are all important. Thank you. We're going to move on to item 6.2, COVID-19 and beyond, a financial perspective. And I'd like to welcome May Hawkins to present this overview. Welcome, May.
Thank you, School Board Chair. I have asked Juanine to share my presentation on her device, so hopefully it'll pop up here in just a second. There we go. All right. Good evening, School Board Chair, board members, and district administrators. As we continue to change to meet the needs of our students during a pandemic, this presentation is meant to inform you about the financial items related to the pandemic with what we know as of today. Next slide, please. So all of our things now include learning intentions, even mine. Don't you like that? I never did learning intentions before, but the learning intentions of the presentation are to let the board know the financial components related to enrollment, staffing, additional COVID-19 expenses, and the grants. We will cover that in 3 major topic areas of 2019-20, where we were, 2020-21, where are we now, and 2021-22, what's next? Next slide, please. We're going to start with 2019, where we were. In the spring of 2020, specifically on March 13th, closed for in-session classes. Enrollment remained flat, all staff remained employed, and some staff were reassigned to other duties. From the governor's executive orders, we were allowed to use special ed funding, even if special ed staff were reassigned to other duties. And we were allowed to continue to pay our special ed contractors a continuation of payment as if school had been in session. Next slide, please. We also got some grant funds from the CARES Act starting in FY 19-20. So in the CARES Act, there are multiple different grants inside of that act. The first one that we talked about and got was the governor's emergency. I don't remember what the rest of the acronym. So the governor's emergency resource, whatever, grant, which was and that was used entirely for student Chromebooks. So all of those funds were used to purchase student Chromebooks that went out to students last spring. For our ESSER funds, Intermediate District 287 received $287,037. We used not quite half of that, $145,82 in 2019-20. Again, that was used for Chromebooks, for hotspots for students who didn't have internet connection, for communications, for translations, for families who have another language than English. We carried over 142,455 to FY21. Next slide, please. So another area that we found out about was FEMA. So due to the pandemic, all government entities were eligible to apply for FEMA. FEMA is a reimbursement grant. You spend the funds first, and then you apply to get reimbursed for what you've already spent. The district attended a training provided by the Minnesota Department of Public Safety and applied for funding for the expenditures encountered prior to June 30th, 2020. During that training, we were informed that redeployed staff who were working totally different jobs from their prior assignment were eligible for FEMA, so we included them in our application. These costs were denied. Their reason for denial was that the staff was paid regular time and not overtime, and so that it wasn't considered an extra expense. The district is currently waiting for the final approval on the additional $32,553.62 of personal protective equipment supplies and contracted services from that time frame. If funded, the district will not receive the FEMA funds until June 2021. Next slide, please. As we knew that the redeployed staff were denied prior to closing our FY20 audit for the year, we moved those costs to Fund 1. These staffing costs plus Chromebooks that didn't go out to students totaled $139,079. So that was Fund 1 dollars that were used in FY20 for COVID-related expenditures. These costs were included in the total admin and operations costs for FY20. And I'll talk a little bit later about how we're going to track that differently moving forward from FY21 and forward. So the total pandemic-related additional costs for both those items that were grant funded and those that were not was $313,933 for FY20. Next slide, please. So we'll now move on to 2021. Where are we now? I had originally titled this section Where We Are Now, but with the continual change and uncertainty, changed it to the question of where are we now? For 2021, what we know so far, enrollment is down from our projections at most sites, and our referrals are down from previous years. We have put in place a hiring freeze for our non-licensed instructional staff. We have new executive orders, right? We have the continuing executive order as of July 31 that special ed staff that are reassigned are still eligible for special ed aid. But now we have an additional order that we have to track all of that separately inside of the special ed, only inside of the special ed financial accounting, not inside of the actual district financial books. We now have a continuation order as of November 6th that we are allowed to pay our special ed contractors again, and then that is eligible for special ed funding, but that is as of November 6th. And then we have the priority to provide in-person learning for students with complex needs. Next slide, please. So in 2021, we got the Coronavirus Relief Funds, or CRF funds, also known as the fastest grant in the West, right? So in my more than 2 decades of school finance experience, I have never seen a grant with this short of time frame, right? We found out about it in August. The application was due in September, and the grant had to be 75% claimed, has to be 75% claimed by tomorrow. Yeah. And it has to be fully claimed by December 30th. So District 287 has already met the 75% deadline for tomorrow. And the grant was spent on, as you can see here, spent on Chromebooks, hotspots, providing Wi-Fi to the exterior of our building so that you can get Wi-Fi from our parking lots and things like that, to provide headsets, and mice, so that each student has their own, right? It was used to provide professional development in our year of learning. It's been used to provide communications and additional ongoing translation for communications, for family and student engagement, right? For us to provide additional family and student engagement, is used to provide taxi services for bringing in the families and students for that mental health that they needed, or we had to redo every student's IEP meeting. And if a family didn't have transportation to be able to come in and attend the IEP meeting, we provided that. And then for personal protective equipment. Next slide, please. So in addition to that, we also have those ESSER carryover funds that I just kind of talked about that we carried over to FY21. At this point in time, we have not budgeted those. We are waiting on the FEMA determinations for our last submission, which I'll talk about in just a second here. But some areas that these funds will probably be spent in is PPE, additional operating costs, and then cost to continue that family engagement component that we just talked about after the CRF grant expires. Next slide, please. So we did once, before we even got the determination on our first application, we submitted our second application to FEMA for the expenditures through September of 2020, from July to September of 2020. Then after we submitted that, we heard from FEMA that they would no longer pay for preventative PPE. So they approved the preventative PPE that was in our first application that we submitted through June 30th. And then in our second application, effective July 1, they no longer pay for preventative measures. They will only pay for items that the district would need to return to normal operations after a pandemic-related exposure at the school. So at this point, on that $60,000 submission that we did, we are waiting to hear on the reimbursement of $21,806.53 for ionization sprayers and the disinfectant that goes in them, and then the classroom sanitizing wipe buckets. Next slide, please. So as part of the unaudited fund balance report that'll be presented at the December board meeting, administration is recommending that $500,000 is set aside in an assigned fund balance to pay for COVID-19 related costs that are not grant eligible or that occur after grant funds are exhausted. Some of the potential expenses include compensatory education for students, safety measures and layers of protection, and reassign staff other than special education staff. In addition to these additional costs, District 287 will also experience reduced revenues that will impact both the financials for FY21 and the resources available to continue services at the same level in FY22. We are anticipating a decrease in the revenues for medical assistance, also referred to as third-party billing. The district cannot make claims for this revenue during distance learning for our educational assistants, which make up the largest portion of this revenue for us. As the number of students in our buildings is down and the number of meals being served is also down, the district is projecting a 50% decrease in our food services revenue. Next slide, please. So that leaves us with 21, 22, and beyond. What's next? And that is a really big question, right? Will there be permanent changes in the delivery model of educational services? We know that a few of our students actually made larger academic gains in distance learning, and we also know that for the majority of our students, in-person learning works best. What will happen with our enrollment? As families did more shopping during the pandemic to find the situation that best met their needs, will those that left public education return? Will there be an even larger need for services as more students experience mental health trauma due to the pandemic? How do we best meet our member district needs? As we start the planning process for the next school year, we have even more unanswered questions than usual. We remain dedicated to our strategic priorities, and we will continue to use these to ground ourselves as we plan for next year. Next slide, please. What we can surmise is both state and federal budgets have taken on costs beyond their budgets. And the best case scenario that's being talked about right now would be a 0% increase in the formulas. We know that based on the fact that all families were eligible for free meals, that our applications for free and reduced meals are way down, and that has the potential to impact our compensatory ed aid in the future. As we already talked about, we know that our medical assistance revenues will be down. There's some unknowns. We don't know what's going to happen with a second federal stimulus, right? That's an unknown right now. And then the Minnesota Financial Working Group completed their report in early November. Will any of their recommendations be adopted in the upcoming state legislature? They come with a large price tag attached to them. And then that implementation would be for FY23. Next slide, please. In summary, the district ended FY20 in good financial condition. The district has a plan to mitigate the additional costs related to the pandemic in FY21, and we are just beginning the planning process for FY22. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it is that we need to be prepared to change plans quickly. Does the board have any questions?
Thank you, May. And there are a couple of raised hands that I'm going to begin with. First, Andrea Keane. Andrea, go ahead, please.
Thank you, May, for that excellent summary, really helpful. I have a question about the slide that talked about how referrals are down compared to prior years. And are there reasons for that other than the obvious? Do you know if member districts aren't referring as many because they aren't being identified, or they're waiting until after we're finished with the pandemic, or do we really not know why?
I'm going to have Elizabeth help me out here.
Okay, if there's not an answer to that question.
I do think that, you know, there are a myriad of variables that are resulting in that. Certainly the uncertainty of our times, I think, has an impact. I think the variability in different learning models across all of our member districts impacts member districts' approach to serving students and what they're able to provide. And a lot of the disruptions we had students projected to come to us that didn't come this fall. And I think there's a lot of family disruptions. The mobility, I think, is higher within the population of students that we serve, more so than in usual years. And certainly right now with, to be frank, with us being in and out of in-person, I think that makes a big difference in terms of how those services, what we can offer and what we are offering and what the students may have in place. A lot of factors, but certainly we're down in referrals.
Thanks.
Our next question or comment is from Heather Douglas, who will be followed by Steve Adams. Heather, go ahead, please.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I have a number of questions, but my first question is about the enrollment. Can you tell us how much we're down by right now?
So that will be part of my report that I give in December. I can tell you that in looking at the special ed enrollment, it's down about 70 students from what we projected.
Okay. And another question that I have is about the Chromebooks. We've obviously spent a huge amount of money on Chromebooks and making sure everyone has the tools that they need to be successful in school. I just want to know, how are we tracking the Chromebooks, making sure they're coming back to us so we can redeploy each year? And what happens if they don't come back? How are we planning to handle that?
Okay, so I might have to tag Kim on this one. So, because she's tracking, her department's tracking all the Chromebooks. And so Kim, why don't you go ahead and then I'll wrap up.
Yeah, so I can let you know that we are tracking, we have an internal inventory system where we track all of our Chromebooks. In addition to that, we are tracking them on the student family delivery form by asset tag. Any students that are no longer with us, we will be, we let those students keep the Chromebooks through the summer, not knowing on their return. So those will be coming back. I would say we aren't struggling with getting devices back so much as getting the cords. That seems to be the bigger obstacle. So we have a little bit of expense out there for the cords. But having said that, the Chromebooks are $250 devices. It's not a huge expense to make sure that our students have what they need. We are not implementing any sort of penalty for not getting a device back with our students and our population.
Okay. So just to follow up on that question while I have you, what happens when a Chromebook is like broken for, accidentally, whatever the reason may be? If something happens to it, do we just replace it, or are we sending them off to repair? Do we have expenses built in for that?
We, I have a great team of IT specialists, and a lot of them have started to learn how to repair on their own. Key repairs, some screen repairs are pretty easy for us to do, but we have to weigh the $250 price tag with the amount of time and money spent on repairs. We are not charging families for any damage, or we will just replace them.
Okay, good. That's good to hear. I have a couple more questions. I will try to be quick. Actually, I will let somebody else ask and then raise my hand again at the end.
Okay, thanks, Heather. We'll hear from Steve Adams. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Heather asked one of the questions that I was also curious about: how much enrollment is down this year. In Hopkins, we're down about, I would say, about 2%. We had budgeted for 113 kids that didn't show up this year. So I'd be curious what 287 is experiencing. But my other question is about meals. I know that the revenue is down for meals. One of the things that we've done in Hopkins, and I don't know if it's an option for 287, but we are on what is called the summer meal program. And that means that we don't charge anybody for meals. They just sign up for it. We put a meal kit together. They come and pick it up once a week, and we get reimbursed by the government for all of that. So our meal revenues are actually up this year compared to previous years. I'm wondering if 287 is eligible for that, and if you've considered it.
Okay, so 287 is also under the same program. The issue we have is that our families don't live close to our sites. They live close to your sites. So they go to your sites to get meals when we're in distance learning, and they don't come to our sites to get meals. And so then our meal counts drop off even farther.
All right, that
when we're in in-person learning.
All right, thank you. I yield to Heather.
Heather, do you have, are you set?
So Steve actually asked what my question was. That was my other question. So thank you, Steve.
Excellent. Next, we have a question or comment from Sam Sant.
I have two questions. The first one regarding the applications with the grants and with FEMA and the CARES Act. With the change in the administration, because you explained what was denied, in our application. Could that be changed with a change in administration? What would be allowed for grants receivables?
I don't know that a new federal administration would be able to change things retroactively. So that might change for that point forward, but I don't know that they could change something that happened before they were in office.
Okay, fair enough. And then my second question is regarding enrollment. Can you tell where on the spectrum the decline enrollment has been? Is it like from all age groups or anywhere in particular specifically?
I don't know. I don't have by age data available at this particular point in time. So I don't know that I would be able to tell you by age group. I will have that information for you at the next board meeting.
Okay. In Robbinsdale, we've noticed the majority of the decline in enrollment was due to our younger age learners, particularly kindergarten. We see how parents are holding back their children to start them, I think, the next year, just to give them a fresh start and starting kindergarten to actually start, eventually one day in a normal situation. So that's what we've noticed anyway in Robbinsdale.
And Heather, go ahead.
I would just echo what Sam said. We actually did some study in that area as well, and we have a huge amount of students who would have come as kindergartners who will not be coming until they're in first or second grade. So hopefully that's also the case here, although it's probably less likely given our the needs of our kids in our district here at 287. But what I did want to ask about was the compensatory funds and the reduction in applications that have been filled out. Have we made effort to try to get more families to fill those out? And is there anything else we can do so that we don't lose that funding in the future?
Yes, we have made lots of efforts. I feel sorry for the poor social workers because I keep telling them we don't have forms and they're contacting families. But, families have so much on their plates right now that filling out a form that doesn't have an immediate impact on their household is a big ask, right? So we've done campaigns, we've done phone calling, our social workers have gone above and beyond, and I am very proud of them. So.
I don't know if this would be appropriate or not, but would it be possible to, when we have like a conference or an IEP meeting or something like that, to have whoever is with those families kind of walk them through that process? I know it only takes a couple minutes to do if maybe they had the support of somebody walking them through it.
So Heather, we already have
Okay.
We already do that at intake, right? So all of our intake meetings have that as part of the packet, and we have somebody walk them through it when a new student is coming on board.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments? Thank you, May, and thanks to your team. Our next item on the agenda is 6.3, Key Performance Indicators Update. I'd like to welcome back Ben McGross and welcome Annie Mitty.
Thank you again, Board Chair Neville, members of the board. Pleased to be back here again for a few more minutes and provide this update on our key performance indicators. Get us started here with sharing my screen. It was so nice to see, May, your learning intentions at the start of your presentation. Thank you for including that. I'll do the same here and just set us up here with our learning intention for the next 10 or 15 minutes. And that's really that you'll be able to walk out of here with an understanding of our key performance indicators and a couple of our key data points that Annie will walk us through in just a few minutes. Just in terms of a little bit of background, key performance indicators, KPIs, are performance metrics that we track, measure, and analyze. And we use our KPIs to understand how we're performing, provide data back to member districts, and of course to set growth goals for our district and for our sites. And over the last maybe 2 years or so, we've really worked hard to organize our key performance indicators around our strategic priorities. Those strategic priorities that you're all familiar with at this point: evidence-based instruction, trauma and healing-centered practices, employee well-being, all wrapped in racial equity, with our goal of improving student outcomes at the center of all of our work. And we've been really working hard, and you'll see an example of it in just a minute, of how we use data as a driver for our work around racial equity. That we're organizing our data to demonstrate and understand racial disparities. That we've made it a part of our school improvement plans to the point that we changed from SMART goals, the SMART acronym, to SMART D goals, which includes an I and an E for inclusion and equity. And across our district now, our school improvement plans at our sites include a racial equity focus, and in particular, a focus on disaggregated data so that we can see the differences between our BIPOC students and our white students and go after our opportunities to close those gaps. And we've been learning to think about how we define those gaps away from achievement gap, which I think too often puts an emphasis on what's happening between a student and a teacher, and to some degree, a school. But really, we've been trying to learn more about the opportunity gaps that exist. What are the opportunity gaps that exist around the access that our BIPOC students have to transportation, to mental health, to more rigorous courses? And so our shift is really starting to take hold around how do we not think just about an achievement gap, but how can we broaden that definition and better understand what the opportunity gap is for our BIPOC students, and so that we can go after really making the changes to close those gaps that we want to see. What you see here is a screenshot of our key performance indicators. And they're organized in the blue lines that you see. One is around COVID and service delivery, but the others are the umbrellas, of course, of our strategic priorities. And we're coming to you tonight kind of in the middle of a process. And that's why you see some blue links, which are hot links to data, and others that are just in the black font that are not yet hot links. Because we're working to build out our key performance indicators in each of these different areas. And there's actually kind of a second and third page to this where these are the ones that we're prioritizing right now, but we have a set of other key performance indicators that is kind of like a part 2 or a next step. But I want to highlight one part of what you see in front of you, and that's the column on the right-hand side that says disaggregation. Our commitment to racial equity means that we don't want our leaders at the building level, our teachers or teaching teams at the building level, or our district leaders even taking one more step to figure out the disaggregated data by race. That we want that data right in front of our leaders making decisions, and so that when they look at something like the percent of students served in each scenario, meaning hybrid or connected learning, that they're also going to see the disaggregated race version of that data as well. Again, because we don't want it to be another step where they may or may not go to. We want our racial equity data to be front and center and easily accessible to everybody who is accessing data. And before I turn it over to Annie to talk us through some specific data sets, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the really awesome work that she's done. Annie's our data assessment coordinator for our district. And she's done all of the behind the scenes work to make this happen. that I may come out and do a presentation or talk about it in a meeting, but Annie's really the brains behind putting all of this together. So I'm happy to have her part of the team and excited to have her walk us through a few data sets. So I'll keep controls of the presentation here, but Annie, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Ben, for that kind acknowledgement. And good evening, Madam Board Chair and members of the board, administrators, and Superintendent Lewandowski. Thank you for your audience tonight. And I will just quickly run through a couple of examples of what the data output looks like for these key performance indicators. This first graph that we're looking at is showing cumulative enrollment since the first day of school. So it has moved a little bit since then. This is everybody who has stopped by in our district. Many are still there. And you'll see on the far left side, you see 287 all, so that's the whole district, and then the larger buildings. These data will include HTC, which is Gateway and a Tier 1 program. So we're looking at the 3 tiers, and as a reminder, down in the bottom, if you want to scroll down, it's kind of small, sorry, but Tier 3 are the students who are in programs like SAFE and SUN, the most staff-intensive programs. Tier 2 are more CIP options, Live ATP focus. And then Tier 1 are, these are kind of outdated names. Sorry, that language is a little outdated, but like Vector and Intersect. So when we look at these data and these graphs that you'll see tonight, we're looking at 100% stacked bar charts, meaning that you can look at a population like HTC with only 94 kids and look at 100% of what's going on with them, or you can look at the whole 287 all and see the percentage of what's going on with, in this example, tiers. Another way we add some accessibility or some flexibility in this is to allow staff to toggle in on those 5 filters at the top so they can customize the data to, meet whatever needs they are asking about. Could you go to the next one, please? This graph is showing, again, cumulative enrollment with learning scenarios. So these are the students who are in hybrid B and hybrid A, right? That difference probably doesn't matter a whole ton to you guys. It does to us when we're going kind of drilling down in there. And then connected learning, this is where Ben had referenced, yep, we have about 60% of students coming in hybrid. And this graph actually skews favorable to connected learning because we have the ALCs in there. District-wide, our ALC students are at about 70% connected learning. So we have the ability to filter those out. So you would see just a little bit more hybrid participation if we had taken out the ALC and HTC students. And on the next slide, we'll see, this is race distribution. And again, we leave the data labels on the graphs. They get kind of crunched when the populations are super tiny. So at the top, there's like weird crunching that goes on. If you hover over one of the tiny bars, it will show you, like it tells you what that is. So you don't just look at like a not usable thing. You can actually see what that says. You have to be really precise with your mouse. So this is the race distribution, again, by 287 all and then by our bigger buildings. On the next graph, this is, I just picked learning scenario again, but instead of having along the horizontal or x-axis, I put race. So this is another way to try to point staff who are using this information, point leaders who are using this information to race and make it more accessible and put that lens on of racial equity on our data first, without having to like filter through or have to kind of take apart. It's already there when you start looking into drilling down at what you're trying to find. And this last it's a graphic. This is not, it's a picture of what comes out of our Sand Creek Employee Assistance Program. We get a quarterly usage update. And this is a summary of the first 3 quarters. Well, sorry, I just questioned myself whether that was right. Of course, it's the first 3 quarters. So That middle gray column is the first, the second, and the third, and then there's a cumulative one at the end. So we can just see how our employees are using Sand Creek, and there's a lot more information that comes out. This is just one tiny piece of that, and this is accessible to leaders too. And that is the end of my little piece of data.
Annie, make sure you stick around to help me answer any questions that might come. Our hope there was just to give you a little bit of peek into the work that we've been doing so far on these key performance indicators. Again, Annie showed you a small portion of the work that we have so far and a small portion of the really grand work that we're in the middle of building out. But we've really been working hard to make sure that we're data informed in our decision making, that you heard that reference earlier when we were talking about our learning model, that we've used our data that you just saw in the Data Studio presentation to really help us understand how many students were accessing our hybrid model, how many students were accessing connected learning, and that we've used that information to inform our professional learning for our staff and figure out how we can best support our students depending on which learning model that they're in. We've really done a lot of work. One of the things that we didn't show you tonight was data around our school engagement instrument, the SCI, which we've come back and talked with in the past to the board in past years. But we have our SCI instrument. We've also had all of our sites, and I believe I mentioned this earlier, really engage in collecting and responding to data around engagement. So all of our sites now have built out a way that they're collecting engagement data every week for their students. That we know, especially now in connected learning, but also as we head into the winter, our ability to understand how engaged our students are is crucial in our ability to keep them connected to our work in 287. So we've really used that data, both kind of the broad data that we're beginning to collect on the SCI and that building level data on engagement, so that we can make sure that we understand who, and again, disaggregated by race data, who is engaged and who is not. And then we're also using some of the data that you saw tonight and the data that we're continuing to collect and to develop as we build out our tiers of support. You might be familiar with terms like RTI and MTSS, but really what we're talking about are tiered systems of support that are really the same thing as those two terms. And that we want to build out these tiers for all, some, few, in all of our areas of our strategic priorities, including evidence-based instruction, of course, but also with employee well-being and our support for students' mental health and trauma, that we want to build out this tiered model of and use data to be informed about how we're going to do that each step of the way. So again, I've mentioned this a few times here, is that we have more work to do around completing additional key performance indicators, that we want to continue to organize our data around the opportunity gap in the way that I talked about earlier. It's important for us to continue on our journey to understand how we define opportunity gap and then the data that we're going to need to collect so that we can close those gaps broader than just an achievement gap. And that we want to develop additional or alternate platforms to create efficiency in data collection and displays. That Annie's done such a wonderful job of putting this all together, but she's done a lot of behind the scenes work to make this happen, collecting lots of data from lots of different sources to put it into one place that we can walk through here tonight. So we want to continue to try to find efficiencies in how we organize the data. And then lastly, we want to continue to gather additional information from our family and from our staff through surveys. We've done some of those earlier, but we're at a point now that we want to and need to collect more data via surveys from our family, our students, and our staff. So with that sort of brief overview of where things stand around our key performance indicators, I'll bring us back to the whole group. I'll stop my screen share. Thank you again, Annie, for walking us through those KPIs, and I'll open it up for any questions that you have.
Thank you, Ben and Annie. There, so far we have 3 people queued up for questions and comments. We'll begin with Andrea Keane, to be followed by Heather Douglas, and then Steve Adams. So Andrea, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Regina. Annie, I want to thank you for putting together the graphs. I think it takes a real gift to be able to take data and then tell a story that people can understand. So really well done. Thank you. And Ben, I was really excited to hear about the idea of a SMART goal that becomes a SMARTY goal. I've never heard of that before. I'm really interested to learn more. It just kind of opens up so many possibilities in my mind. Is that something that was invented by 287, or should I just Google it after the meeting?
I would love to take credit for it, or on behalf of 287 take credit for it. But no, it's not unique to us. I do think that it's becoming more prevalent in educational communities. But it's a really good way that we've been able to work with our building leaders, and Chad and John, Elizabeth and I, we're all working with our building leaders today on their school improvement plans. And it gave us a really nice window into talking about not just a SMART goal, but how can we make sure that the goal that you're writing here is going to help us produce better and different outcomes, particularly for our BIPOC students. And so just that little shift and addition that we've made on our SMART goals has really helped us be able to drive back to our big picture goals around racial equity.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Next one, Heather Douglas, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I just was really impressed with the whole presentation and how the information came together. Both of you obviously did a phenomenal job, and I'm sure that you had a lot of support from other staff members. So thank you to all of the people involved in that work. I had a question about how I feel like I was really focused on reading the information that I kind of missed when you said who has access to the information. Can you please refresh my memory on who all has access to that information?
Yeah, sure. And I don't believe that I shared this, so you didn't miss anything.
Okay.
Right now, the access level for that data studio that you saw Annie walking us through right now sits with all of our district leaders and our building leaders. That we haven't expanded it out from there. Of course, they can use that, and we would want them to use that with their leadership teams and with their entire staff that we're building towards that. But in terms of just access to those links and that table grid that I shared, right now that just sits with our district leaders and our building leaders.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Next up is Steve Adams. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Chair Neville. I thank you, Ben and Annie, for the presentation. I've been a big proponent of disaggregating data for a long time. It really helps you zero in on what your issues are in your organization and really address them. And we're doing that in Hopkins to some extent. And we use a software product called Tableau. And I'm just curious what software tools you might be using to achieve your disaggregation.
Annie, go ahead.
Right now, most of what we do is in Google, and we're moving things out of student information systems that are running in the district kind of parallel and not necessarily always talking. And I'm dumping it into Google mostly for the ease of making those graphs. In the long term here, we are working to revise, we call it Illuminate, other districts will call it like EduPoint, EduClimber. There's a big suite of things. Our word for it is Illuminate, where it's a big data warehouse with lots of flexibility around what we can show to whom. So to Heather's point about what do you see, we're going to be able to control that and point them to graphs that will be targeted for their needs eventually. That's coming.
Is this Illuminate a Google product also?
No, I can't remember the parent company's name off the top of my head. If someone wants to help me out, I'd be happy.
I've spent a couple of decades in the software business. I'm curious about all this. So.
I'd be happy to figure it out and let you know.
Well, thank you, Annie.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments? This just definitely helps with decision-making process, so thank you. We really appreciate the background and the data and just the living system that it provides to continue to track everything. Next up is what the board needs to know about emergency and crisis plans for 2020, 2021. This will be an action item. And I welcome, Sandy, you want to give an introduction or additional information?
Just a little additional information and introduction, if you will. For board members who may not have been part of this in past years, this is a board policy specifically generated by a board member years ago with the intent that board members should be kept informed each year about some of the parts of our crisis plan to ensure that we are in a crisis ready kind of status, if you would. And certainly that's been tested this year. And part of why we are doing as well as we are is because of Jake. He has really brought a real strength to our incident command group. And we're grateful to have him with us during the school year, but also here tonight to present on our crisis plan. So thank you, Jake.
Welcome, Jake.
Sorry. Thank you, Sandy and Madam Chair, Neville, and board directors. Good evening. I'm here to discuss our emergency and crisis management plans for the 2020-21 school year. There have been no updates to our emergency management plan and procedure guide, which coincides with our crisis management plan for this school year. The one addition to our crisis management plan, which every school has been required to have this year, is the COVID-19 preparedness plan due to the global pandemic. So the preparedness plan accounts for all required guidelines and recommendations made by the Department of Health and the Department of Education. As we all are aware by now, the situation is so evolving and changing daily as we continue to learn more around COVID-19. So just know that this plan will continually be reviewed, updated to ensure the District 287 is staying current with all health and safety best practices, and especially now, new health practices that are being developed just to combat COVID. So by doing so, we are hopeful to provide a safe and secure work environment for staff and students, which aligns with supporting our satisfactory student outcomes. So with that, Chad, unless you have more to add, I will open it up for a discussion.
Thank you, Chad. Any additional comments?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to offer a big thanks to Jake for all the work that he's done. It's been 24/7, as you all know, because you're doing the same thing in your district. So I just want to extend a big thank you to Jake for all of his efforts and leadership in keeping our staff and students safe with the many layers of protection that he's worked effortlessly on to build into our district, so that we're doing everything that we can to minimize transmission in our sites. So thank you, Jake.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have a question or comment from Crystal Brackey. Crystal, go ahead, please.
Yes, first just wanted to say, Jake, thanks for being with us tonight. We really, really appreciate it and the work that you do. And I know you said that the plan itself is unchanged. So that probably answered my question, but I was just wondering whether any of our sort of requirements or responsibilities do shift with kids being home instead of in buildings. Or does our responsibility really begin and end with things that physically take place in our school sites? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I mean, ultimately, it was a big shift when we brought students back in, right? I mean, a lot of it was we wanted to try to reduce transmission within the sites, and moving to a more connected learning environment will reduce that risk. So I would say it's going to lighten the risk level based on how many people we have within our building. So yes, it was a lower risk when we were in connected learning. It heightened when we brought more students and staff in, and it will lighten a little bit more when we move to connected. I hope that answers your question.
Any additional questions or comments?
I'm just the quick follow-up. It sounds like we don't have responsibility for anything that takes place outside of our school grounds, even though our students are learning from home. Is that accurate?
That would be accurate.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Given that, again, thank you, Jake. Thank you, Chad. Is there a motion to accept the emergency and crisis plans for 2020-2021 as presented?
I so move. Andrea Keane.
Moved by Sam, seconded by Andrea. And Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Adams.
Aye.
Brackey is an aye. Casey. Aye. Keane.
Yes.
Dallas. Ruthie, are you with us? You might be on mute.
Yes.
Great. Douglas.
Aye.
Coons.
Aye.
Marty.
Aye.
Neville.
Aye.
Sant.
Yes.
Seidel.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you all. We'll move on to item 6.5, what the board needs to know about classification and compensation study. And I'd like to welcome Michelle Axel, our Director of Human Resources, and Ann Becker, our General Counsel, to present this executive summary of a report on classification and compensation.
And while
Michelle, oh, go ahead, Sandy.
I was just, I wasn't sure if you were on yet. Just a clarification, Michelle couldn't be here tonight, and so Ann will handle the presentation. So thank you, Ann.
So actually, the idea behind the What the Board Needs to Know document was to provide you with all of the background information that you would need for the December meeting, when Sandy will be bringing forward the recommendations that are indicated in that document. So rather than a presentation, this was for your information, and please feel free to reach out with any questions. We'll be bringing all of this information back at the December meeting.
Thank you. So this is good background in preparation for December. Are you able to take any questions or comments now if board members have them?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, and again, I appreciate your invitation that we can reach out for additional information, and also appreciate that this will be brought back in December. This is good background. I appreciate that the district took the time to gather the information. It definitely will help inform our decision-making process as we move forward. So it's good data. Thank you. The next item is moving on to board business, and we'll begin with section 9, board chair report. Here, just in light of all of the discussion that I believe all of our districts are having regarding the best model for operating our school districts, we felt it was prudent to bring back our discussion of meetings by telephone or other electronic means. So before us, we have the opportunity for taking a look at a return to a virtual format for our board meetings. And this would take effect in December. And it would just be going back to the model that we had when the pandemic began. So I'd like to just entertain any questions, comments, discussion about this move on behalf of our board. Okay, and this would be a resolution item. And we have just a point of clarification, Anne, if I can. We have the two attachments here, the approval of the resolution for board meetings by electronic means and the resolution for electronic board meetings. Can these be done by a single resolution, or should we be doing two separate resolutions? Oh, Juanine, thank you.
Sorry, one is just an action item for the resolution, so it's the same thing.
So a single action. Thank you. That was my expectation coming in, and then I realized that we do have 2 items listed. So thank you. I appreciate that. So any discussion before taking a resolution vote on this item? Thank you. Is there a motion for approval of the resolution for board meetings by electronic means?
Chair Neville, I move that we approve the resolution for meetings by electronic means.
Thank you. Moved by Steve Adams. Is there a second?
Second, Heather Douglas.
Seconded by Heather Douglas. Thank you. Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Adams.
Aye.
Brackey is an aye. Casey.
Aye.
Keane.
Yes.
Dallas.
Yes.
Douglas.
Aye.
Coons.
Aye.
Marty.
Aye.
Neville.
Aye.
Sant.
Yes.
Seidel.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you all. This brings us to our AMSD report, and we do have 3 representatives who are affiliated with District 287 who are also participants with AMSD. So Ruthie Dallas, Ann Casey, and Andrea Keane. Who can give us an update this evening?
It's my turn, Madam Chair. It's Andrea Keane.
Thank you, Andrea.
I'll give you a quick update. The AMSD Board of Directors met on November 6th. First, Chris Amundson and Lori Grivna from Amundson Strategies, they're also AMSD lobbyists, presented a 2020 election recap as well as a 2021 session preview. Just a couple of highlights include the fact that Minnesota was #1 in voter turnout again, with over 3.26 million votes, which is 79% of registered voters. Go Minnesota. Minnesota also remains the only state in the entire country with divided government at the state level. Our state Senate has a slim Republican margin so far, 34-33, while the House remains CFL-led with a 70-64 margin. In the coming weeks, the state legislature will be working on caucus organization and committee structure and membership. And the looming state budget deficit will continue to have a large impact. The November forecast should be available the first week of December. These numbers will be used during the session, which starts the very first week of January. Presently, the budget deficit is $4.7 billion for the 22-23 biennium. Mark your calendars for Friday, January 8th. That's the AMSD session preview from 8 to 10 a.m. It will be held on Zoom, and all board members are welcome. And all of the legislators who represent any AMSD districts will also be invited and welcome to attend. Finally, Scott gave a quick executive director report. A few points of interest are that, unfortunately, 2 out of 3 AMSD districts who had referendum elections failed. Fridley did pass, but both Orono and Shakopee failed. AMSD had a clean audit, and as we discussed briefly before, the school finance working group report has been released. I think that's it. Is there anything I missed, Ruthie, Ann? All right, thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And then in terms of just district news and updates, according to the board packet, we do have another opportunity for a local 2209 board breakfast. Without the breakfast, it's our virtual communication chance. So the next one is scheduled for Tuesday, December 15th. And Juanine, would it just be best if people email you if we're able to attend?
Yes.
And then we'll get a link. And this is a 7 a.m., is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. 7 a.m. on December 15th. So just an opportunity to join for breakfast, bring some coffee. And anything for once around the table. So just want to congratulate Heather Douglas on your reelection. I think that's exciting. Is there any other big election that I'm missing here with our board members?
I was reelected, Ruthie Dallas.
Thank you. Congratulations, Ruthie and Heather. This is great. It's great for your home districts and it's good for 287. So thank you so much. Any other district news that anyone would like to share with once around the table? I think I just went away from the site where I can see the raised hands. Oh, I'm back. Okay. All right. Well, these are definitely, I think we're all dealing with the same. Oh, there we go. I'm kind of got myself off. Did anybody want to raise their hand?
I did, Regina, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
Well, I'm looking for sympathy for poor Orono. This was the second time technology levy was not approved by a very, very slim margin. And it sort of, I just shake my head because it's technology. And this is what we have to spend so much money on updating. And from what we heard this evening already, what it costs to give every student a Chromebook. And I don't have to tell my fellow board members about that, but I just felt, I was very surprised that it didn't make it. Also, just to mention, MSBA is conducting their delegate pre-assembly in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll have a totally virtual delegate assembly. And this year it'll be all done in one day. And so there is still time to send in resolutions or requests to have resolutions added. I just got my packet of resolutions today. I do go to the delegate assembly as a delegate for Intermediate District 287 rather than my home district of Orono. I'm not on the board of Orono anymore. So yeah, so that's what I wanted to share. So thank you. And it's nice to see everyone.
Thank you.
We wish we could see you, Michelle.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it is sad to hear about the failure of the referendum. We all know what a difference they make when they pass and how difficult it is to lobby for them from year to year. So I am sorry about that.
Thank you.
I just want to share gratitude for all of our 287 staff members, for our leadership team, for all of our students and families as we navigate education together. None of it is what any of us would like it to be, but I'm grateful for the patience, the care, and the time that everyone is committing to do what we can to make this work as best as we can. And Superintendent Lewandowski, I would invite you just to make any closing comments this evening before we adjourn.
Yeah, I think you said it well. This is a remarkable time, and it's bringing out both challenges, but a lot of, I think, cooperation and working together in a way that people rise to when you're in this kind of situation. And I'm grateful to be in this organization where I see that happening every day.
Thank you.
Hear,
All
hear.
right. With that, is there a motion to adjourn for the evening?
So moved. Adams.
Moved by Steve Adams.
Second, Michelle Coons.
Seconded by Michelle Coons. Thank you. Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Adams.
Aye.
Brackey is an aye. Casey. Aye. Keane.
Yes.
Dallas.
Yes.
Douglas.
Aye.
Coons.
Aye.
Marty.
Aye.
Neville.
Aye.
Sant.
Yes.
Seidel.
Yes.
Motion carries. With that, we are adjourned.
Good night, everyone.
Everybody.
Everybody.
Thanks.
Don't have to say drive careful to them, right?
That is true.